right, let's hit the field.
All right. Just wanted to talk, that's all.
It's that time of the year again. The MLB trade deadline is this month, and the rumor mill is just beginning to heat up. Tonight, we've got a conversation with Yankees beat reporter Max Goodman to talk about the Yankees' top trade targets, plus which injured players could be nearing a return, and who's the next big prospect to get a call to the show. Buckle up, it's going to be a wild month. This is NYY Recaps.
Welcome to Yankee Stadium.
Just when they thought I was out, they pull me back in.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Trade deadline is this month, and welcome back to Max Goodman, who's here to talk about it with us. How you doing, Max?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm jealous that you get to travel around with the team all summer, but I get to at least stay out of the heat, so I got that going for me. You're obviously with this team a lot. You're familiar with its strengths and weaknesses, current roster, guys on the injured list, minor leagues. You're as familiar with it as anybody. So I want to just start off by asking you this right off the bat. Does this team as presently constructed have enough to get by the Orioles?
Oh, man. I think so much would have to go right for that to be the case. I think that they certainly have the potential to get there. But, we were talking about this before, you went live. The lineup, the ceiling there's so much depth and firepower, but 4 through 9 with Stanton on the injured list, it's not getting the job done right now. And you kind of revert back to the 2022 vibes with just how top heavy this is, where Judge is having a historic year. You factor in Soto as well, but the rest of those guys, Verdugo, LeMahieu, Glaber, Trent Grisham's playing a lot, the catchers, and Ben Rice now. Just looking at this Toronto series that I was up at Rogers Center for those 4 games, the 2 games they won, it was pretty commanding wins, and you saw a comprehensive effort on offense. And this is just talking about the offense real quick. The 2 losses that they had, 4 through 9, they had barely any hits, barely any extra base hits, no run production. It was just Judge and Soto. And quite frankly, Anthony Volpe hasn't been as good for a pretty extended stretch now as well. So I do think there are a lot of needs. And if they make the right opportune trades at the deadline, because of the way that the market is, I don't think that they should necessarily overpay for some of the bigger names out there. You mix that with some guys starting to have a better second half, some health, that's always important, and then maybe just a couple boosts, whether it's external guys coming in and then a few pieces coming off the injured list. It's certainly feasible. But with the way these past couple of weeks have gone, I feel like it's the Orioles division to lose more so. I don't know if you're in agreement with me there.
Yeah, that's what I've been saying. When the Orioles caught the Yankees, I said, they're probably not going to, lose momentum here. They're only going to continue to play well. And right now it's on the Yankees to fight their way past the Orioles, because the Orioles, if everything remains as is, I think have a better overall team 1 through 9. But the Yankees have addressed one of their issues. Ben Rice replaced Anthony Rizzo at first base. What are your thoughts so far on him? You saw him in person. Do you think they've solved the first base issue without having to make a trade internally?
I mean, recently he's been their 3rd best hitter, right?
That's good.
Just the quality of at bat from Rice recently, he's made the adjustment pretty seamlessly. And I'm not necessarily surprised about that. I mean, he's hit at every single level in the minor leagues. I know that the Yankees are very fond of him as a prospect, and they think that his ceiling offensively is very, very high. I think if he can produce this way for the rest of the season and continue to get better, as that's going to happen when he gets more reps and starts to face different types of pitchers, see how they adjust to him, and if he can make those corresponding adjustments, they might just have their first baseman for next year, right? I mean, If you want to go out and re-sign Juan Soto and make some other impactful moves, you have to get younger and cheaper at different positions. And that's an example right there. You look at second base too, maybe bringing up Dominguez as a full-time option next year. We'll see where Spencer Jones is at in the outfield. But if you have Rice at first, he's been playing well defensively there, other than that one play that hit the first base bag in Toronto.
Yeah.
I think he's been impressive overall for a full-time catcher at a secondary position. And that doesn't hurt with versatility either, right? I mean, having someone who can also catch in a pinch, he's been great so far. Everything that the coaching staff has said, and even some other players, they've been very impressed with how he's handled himself thus far.
So let's talk about the obvious needs here. So the bullpen has not been good. The third base position, obviously Oswaldo got off to a great start, but he's come back down to earth. LeMahieu's been hitting a little bit better lately, but he's not terrifying any opposing pitchers at this point in his career. John Birdie has not been healthy. When he's been in there, he's been solid. I think he's been exactly what they wanted, a guy who can pick it and make a little bit of contact, be dangerous on the bases, but he's had 2 leg injuries so far. We don't know when we're going to get him back or what shape he's going to be in when he comes back. So really that leaves third base, probably bullpen, maybe second base if Gleyber Torres doesn't keep up this hitting that he's had recently. What are your thoughts on what the Yankees view as their biggest need as we go towards the deadline here?
I would say it's the bullpen. Obviously, the infield and really the second half of the lineup is a glaring issue right now. And, the stat that stands out to me is just as an infield this year overall, and this is, again, including Volpe, who played really well at the beginning, but, I mean, his OPS is just hanging on over 700. He's been much more of a singles hitter this year, which isn't the worst thing, but he's been zapped of his power with the adjustments he made. The infield as a whole has an 88 WRC plus. They're hitting 237 with a 650 OPS. That's like bottom third, if not even lower, in all of baseball as those 4 positions comprehensively. So obviously Volpe's not going anywhere, and LeMahieu's not really going to go anywhere either. I think that he could project well as kind of that 6th man off the bench type of guy where he's going to play, different positions, give Rice a day at first, play at third also. But really, the bullpen is such a glaring need for them, if you ask me. I go back to May 20th, which is the day that Clay Holmes gave up 4 runs to the Mariners, the first time he gave up any runs in the entire season, the blown save. That morning, they were tied with Cleveland for the best bullpen ERA in all of baseball. And since then, they have the 3rd worst bullpen ERA in all of baseball. It's up over 5. And I'll ask you this before we continue, because this is something we're going to talk about a bunch in the bullpen, is who do you really trust out there? If it's a playoff game and you have a lead and it's the 6th, who do you go to? Because Holmes is an elite closer. I know he's been, a liability of late, but I don't necessarily think they're going to go out and get a closer per se. I can see someone else pitching in safe situations, as that always happens over the course of a year. But really, we're looking here at high leverage arms. And other than Luke Weaver and Michael Tonkin, who's been a revelation, I think you can clarify Weaver as a revelation too, because both of those guys are basically scrap heap arms that they've turned into now dominant weapons. And we'll see how they perform the rest of the year, because it is still a little bit of a small sample with Tonkin, but I digress. Canley's been a little better of late, but right. I mean, who do you really trust? Right. I think it's Tonkin, Weaver, and Holmes right now, and that's not enough to win a championship.
Yeah, and Tonkin is a guy who got DFA'd 3 times. It's like, I don't know if the Yankees have unlocked him or if it's just kind of one of those things where he's pitching well right now and he comes back down to earth. We are getting Efros back. I think he'll help. We have some guys we can put possibly in the bullpen, because you're not going to have a 5-man rotation in the playoffs. You got to look at who would be effective. I think that Stroman probably most effective as a starting pitcher. Nestor Cortez I could see going to the bullpen, as a lefty who's kind of funky. He's pitched in the bullpen before. Clark Schmidt, when he comes back, I think he's effective as a starter, but in the playoffs, you could definitely use him out of the pen, because he's not going to go deep into the game. He's pitched out of the pen before, and he's a strikeout guy. He's more swing and miss than a lot of guys they have right now.
That's big right there, what you just mentioned, and I didn't even get to say that yet. They're bottom 3rd in the league in bullpen strikeout rate this year.
Yeah.
And, Chris Kirshner of The Athletic and I talked to Matt Blake in Toronto just a couple days ago, and he was explaining how the ceiling of the bullpen with what they have, they don't need strikeouts. It's not a necessity. If everyone does what they do best, you don't necessarily need that. But in the playoffs or against really good teams, that's the best way to get guys out, right? It's the highest percentage way to get guys out, is to not have them put the ball in play, to get them to strike out, to get them to swing and miss, to get them to chase, to whiff, all that good stuff. Yeah. And there really isn't that type of presence in their bullpen right now. I mean, that's what you have with Holmes. He's a weak contact ground ball guy, and he's elite at that. But sometimes that's going to lead to clunkers and blown saves when a bloop kind of sets the snowball off, and then a lapse in command, and who knows what happens from there. But Ian Hamilton's regression this year has been a blow for them.
Yep.
And health, like you said, I mean, having Efros come back, that deceptive look, and he's a swing and miss guy, that'll help. But I think that they need to go out, and whoever they do acquire, and I think that Efros is a good person to name here because he wasn't necessarily a top candidate to go out and trade for in 2022 because of the amount of years of control that he had. You usually think of rentals and more veteran arms, but even if that was out of left field, it was an opportune trade for them because the Yankees continue to show that they're willing to use top starting pitching prospects, and they used Hayden S. Wesneski there to get someone that had like 6 years of control. And obviously Efros hasn't been healthy, but that was a pretty solid move by the Yankees to do something that we didn't necessarily see coming. And I think that that's certainly on the table this year and any year, that you look at someone's strength, and the Yankees pitching department has been great at this of late. Find someone who misses bats, and they don't necessarily have to be Mason Miller or Tanner Scott or any of those big name guys that we'll get into. Give something that the Yankees have a surplus of, or an ability to replenish if you want to use the top pitching talent in the farm system. And there you go. You might be able to fill the need with someone that we're not going to mention today, that, right before the deadline, it's another one of those surprise moves.
I'll throw one at you as we move to trade targets. This is a guy, I'm not sure the Rangers are ready to pack it in yet, but what about David Robertson? They're 6 games under 500. He still gets a ton of strikeouts. Just a couple of weeks ago, he struck out Betts, Freeman, and Ohtani back-to-back-to-back, I think 2 nights in a row. He can still do it. And if the Rangers are falling out of it at the trade deadline, he might be somebody who's not expensive. He's 39 years old. I believe he's a free agent after the year. He was part of the 2009 championship. I could see him coming back. What are your thoughts on D-Rob?
We are on the same page here, because when you messaged me and said, I want to get your sense on maybe some under the radar guys, that was someone I was going to mention. And I've said on other shows that what he did against the Dodgers there, nobody in the Yankees bullpen can necessarily do that, right? Their best swing and miss guy so far this year has been either Weaver or Caleb Ferguson. And Ferguson has struggled mightily. I mean, that's been a blow for them too, that they got him and Gonzalez from the Dodgers, and neither of them have panned out to really fill the Wandy Peralta role. So I think now we have to bring in the fact that the added wild card spots has totally changed the way that the market is going to go this last year or two now. You got to keep a close eye on the Cubs, the Diamondbacks, the Rangers, those teams that have valuable assets that if they don't play well over the next couple of weeks, they probably should sell off those pieces. But they're also hanging around, right? I mean, all you have to do is get in these days. Diamondbacks, the Phillies, these last couple of years, they've shown that's how you can win a championship, or at least get pretty close. And that's still a successful year. So Robertson would be an improvement for them. I don't know, like you said, it would probably be easier to get him than one of the bigger names. I don't know if you're going to ask about Mason Miller. I don't necessarily see that happening just because of how much it would take to get him.
Right,
and that's volatile arm. Like, he's throwing so hard. It's a risk. You don't know how healthy he's going to be over the next few years. And again, I know that probably some fans are annoyed that this is a take these days because they want to see, higher profile arms get added, but the Yankees continue to churn out these reclamation projects. If there's another Tonkin out there, that would be a way to not have to go out and trade too many prospects and just have that improvement with a lower profile arm. And I know that's not something you can bank on always, but they have done that a lot lately with Hamilton. Again, he hasn't been as great this year. Lucas Litke a couple years ago. So that's certainly on the table as well.
Tim Hill doesn't look bad. I mean, since he came over, he's got a funky little look. But I don't think you're going to amp up the clubhouse, amp up the fan base if you go get another Michael Tonkin, right? I think they got to get at least one name. Is it Tanner Scott? Is it Cody Bellinger? Do you think Gio Urshela could come back and play third base? I've seen a lot of names out there. Garrett Crochet is one we see a lot of. I'm not super on board with that because he's another guy who's over his innings from recent years, And so I don't know how available he's going to be down the stretch, having worked as a starter. If he were willing to come over and go right into the bullpen, yeah, sure. But I don't want to be dealing with an innings limit when we're trying to win a pennant. We've already got that with a couple of guys on this roster. So in terms of the names that you've heard thrown out there, and maybe it's good to mention also JT Brubaker, a guy who we traded for before the season, is on his way back. We might finally get a look at him. I don't even know anything about him. But what do you think about the names that are out there?
Well, for Brubaker, they're building him up as of now as a starter, by the way. So as much as who knows what's going to happen in a couple months, they could use him as a long man. That was kind of the plan with Luke Weaver, right? And now he's basically their 8th inning guy. So plans change. But Brubaker right now is warming up as a starter in the minors. I think that if anything, it would be Efros. That's kind of the plug-in 7th, 8th inning type of guy. So the opposite side of the wild card discussion is what teams are definitely selling, and that's the White Sox, the A's, the Marlins. I'm sure there are others, but those are the 3 that came to mind first. If it's not Mason Miller with the A's, maybe it's Lucas Urseg. I think that's how you say his last name. Yeah, and that's someone that gets a lot of strikeouts, gets a lot of whiffs. And something I forgot to mention earlier with the bullpen is there's only a handful of lefties out there. So you kind of think that they need lefties, but if you take a deeper look at it, their splits are the other way around. They've been much worse against right-handed hitters and much better against lefties. So in a sense, it wouldn't be the worst thing to add more righties that get righties out, because that's been a weakness for them too, even beyond the strikeouts. If I remember correctly, I didn't look this up before we started, I think that left-handed hitters are hitting like 1-something against Yankees relievers this year, and righties are 260 up closer to 300. So Urseg's great against righties, for instance. I don't know if the Marlins would give up Tanner Scott. They'd probably get a haul for him. Andrew Nardi's another name from there. And the Angels, Carlos Estevez is a name that I've seen thrown around with also Luis Rengifo as an offensive guy. So there's a ton of different options. A lot can change over these next couple weeks based on how those teams that are closer to being fringe playoff organizations, how they play. But yeah, when you're looking at the White Sox are definitely going to give up talent. The A's definitely are. The Marlins definitely are. There's going to be a lot of teams that want that talent too, though, because if you're a fringe team like the Mets that a month ago it looked like they were going to be selling pieces off, now they'll probably go out and add because they have momentum and they're, who knows what's going to happen if they do make it into the playoffs.
So in terms of trade chips that we have right now to deal, I don't think they're going to give up Spencer Jones. I don't think they're going to give up the Martian. They wouldn't trade either of those guys for a full year of control of Juan Soto, right? So that kind of takes – I don't see any Juan Sotos out there. Maybe a Mason Miller was like, top of the market guy where you could deal with Spencer Jones, but I don't think Cashman would make that move. So in terms of the next level of chips, who do you think that the Yankees would have to give up to kind of go out and replenish this roster?
It's an interesting discussion because Everson Pereira is now out for the year with Tommy John surgery, so he's damaged goods, and he would have been the prototypical piece to move because there's really no path for him to be in the majors with this club, especially if Jones and Dominguez work out. If you bring Soto back, you've got Judge out there. There's just no space. Verdugo's a free agent, obviously. And who else was I going to mention? Oswald Peraza, right? I mean, they've shown what they really think of him these last couple of years by not.
They hate him.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that, but they clearly aren't willing to give him a full-time opportunity because there has been chances, and obviously he's gotten hurt. He hasn't played well, but they never really considered him in the same light as a Volpe, who then got the starting job and ran with it. So I don't know how other teams are going to evaluate those guys. For instance, maybe they do think that Pereira can be a long-term fit in the outfield, and he could be kind of packaged in with something. The Yankees' specialty, though, is trading pitchers, right? And even there, Will Warren coming into this year would have been the top guy. Same with Chase Hampton, who's been injured all year. He's starting to throw again. Warren hasn't pitched that well this season. So does the injury to Hampton, the injury to Pereira, the recent performance from Peraza and Warren for instance, just naming those 4 guys because they're so highly rated, does that change the way that another team would maybe look at them as a centerpiece in a deal? But the Yankees, they just churn out pitching talent, right? So there are going to be some guys in Hudson Valley that you might not know that much about that other teams are going to consider a viable asset, and that's how they'll get those trades done, because the Yankees, they draft and develop so well with pitching that just in the last 2-3 years, they've traded so many pitching prospects, and it hasn't hurt them at all. They just continue to replenish those guys. One other piece, and I know you had his picture there in the intro, is Agustin Ramirez. And that's an interesting case because with how well he's done of late and the Gary Sanchez-esque power at a premium position at catcher with the improvements he's made defensively, the Yankees are loaded at catcher too. There's not necessarily a spot for him right away if you're moving forward with Wells. Is Rice going to catch? Trevino hasn't, been able to control the running game, but he's so elite with framing and managing a pitching staff. I don't necessarily know how Augustine fits in right now, and his value is as high as it's ever going to be, especially if he can start to produce well in AAA since he got called up pretty recently there. So if they don't want to go down the Gary Sanchez road again, where defense is more of a liability with him as much as he's improved, his bat, the ceiling is crazy high. And the power is prodigious with him. Someone told me a couple years ago it's out of this world, which is, you throw that in with like a Dominguez, right? Yeah. So that could be a top piece in a trade, especially because he's pretty close. It's not like it's a project that's much younger, and the Yankees have shown a willingness to do that too with the John Birdie trade, right? Who knows if John Cruz ends up being a superstar down the road, but he's so far away that it makes that trade a little easier. In the NBA, these teams are trading away draft picks in 30-24, right? I mean, it's so easy to compartmentalize that because the GM that's here now isn't going to deal with that when that player ends up getting drafted that's in middle school right now or whatever it is.
Yeah. I'm really anxious to see what Agustin Ramirez can do, and we'll talk about him a little bit more when we get to the minor league stuff, but he's got a great swing. He's got massive, massive power. I want to talk a little bit about injuries because we got some guys that are coming back. Clark Schmidt, I read, is throwing. He's right at the very beginning of his throwing program. We got Giancarlo out for a little while, obviously. Efros and Brubaker throwing. Who do you think is going to be like the first guy back? And, at what time frame are we looking on having most of these guys back?
It varies, right? I mean, like Dominguez, we may not see him again this year, depending on how it's an 8-week injury. Obliques, as we know, with Aaron Judge and other, fiery swingers, right? That's a very sensitive spot to have an injury. Still coming back from Tommy John. He didn't really have that much time to get back to playing every day with that. So you don't want to rush him back and risk something else happening. If anything, he'd be like a late September, maybe. If everything goes well, a September call-up. But who would be closest? Nick Birdie isn't that far. Brubaker has been improving really quickly in terms of his build-up, and Efros, I think, is a couple weeks, maybe. Yeah. Ian Hamilton hasn't done too much yet. Schmidt, it's a little more of a long-term build-up now because he's been out for so long. And I agree with what you said earlier about Schmidt as maybe a bullpen guy down the stretch because you don't know how he's going to respond now to the 2-month layoff. And you don't need 5 starters in the playoffs, especially with Luis Gil, if he continues to show that he is able to withstand this crazy increase in workload for him. I think he'll probably end up in a different role at some point. But if you want him to start, because at his peak, that you want him to start, right?
Right.
There isn't enough spots, and Schmidt has experience in the bullpen too. So Cody Petit is also not that far away, but that's more depth in terms of the rotation. The Yankees have a long way to go, right? I mean, we are in the second half, and the season has flown by, but having depth and all these guys coming back is still important because you want to preserve bullets for some of your really key pieces, and it benefits them to take their time with Garrett Cole, for instance, and maybe give Heel a month to ease back, or I don't know if they would send him down and just kind of limit his innings. We ask about that all the time, and every chance the Yankees get, whether it's Blake or Aaron Boone or even Heel himself, they say that he's responding well, and it's something that they're keeping an eye on, and that he's been as strong as ever, right? So obviously he hasn't performed as well recently, but he's never thrown this many innings in his professional career. It's not just in the majors. So that's something to keep an eye on for someone coming back from TJ.
I was going to say his ERA isn't responding well the last couple of times out.
Right,
But all right, so as we look forward to the second half, what are your thoughts on Carlos Rodon? Because he obviously had that great stretch where he won 7 or 8 games in a row. Last 3 times out, he has been dog manure. He seemed to settle down after an 8-0 deficit, but that's kind of like saying, well, I swam out of my car, but it was already at the bottom of the river. You know, I guess you take the win. But look, we need him to perform. Is it a mental thing? Is it a stuff thing? Like, is he not responding well because he threw too few innings last year? Is he just hitting the wall? What are your thoughts on his struggles, and do you think he can turn it around?
Well, he was looking like an all-star early on, right? And really, that start that he had in Kansas City in early June was kind of like, okay, he came back to where he ended last season and didn't get an out. And that was just the worst possible way to end the worst possible first season for him with the contract that he signed and the expectations. Goes back, throws 7 innings of 1-run ball, I think it was. It's like, okay, this is what the Yankees are having for the rest of the year with him. And these last 3 starts, like you said, he's struggled pretty mightily. At the most elementary level, it seems like if he throws his secondary pitches more and earlier in the game, he can offset the fact that teams are really hunting his fastball. And that pitch has been such a bread and butter pitch for him throughout his career. But other teams just have a game plan right now of hunting it and ambushing it. And when he's throwing that pitch more than any other pitch, you can kind of sit on it. And these last couple starts, like you said, he's adjusted well, but he started throwing secondary pitches more. Makes you wonder why he hasn't done it earlier. So I think that they're, as a pitching department and just the staff in the majors, obviously it's something that needs to get fixed with him, because this has the potential to spiral. You don't want him starting to compensate or get in his head, because he did pitch so well, and that probably did wonders for his confidence after the way last season went. But I think that's something to keep an eye on with him as a pitcher that made $162 million because of his fastball.
Right.
That's the pitch that got him that contract when he was, getting Cy Young votes with the Giants and the White Sox before that. He's a fastball guy. So it'll probably be weird for him to go into a start and be like, okay, I'm just going to not become a junk baller, right? But like use my secondaries more than I ever have before. Maybe you do that for a little bit and get opponents away from just sitting dead red early in counts. I mean, that Braves start, it was fastball hit, fastball home run to start the game. And then the next time out, the same thing happened again. You know what I mean, right? Like, it's pretty clear that that's what the issue is right now. And you mix that in with, lapses in command and sequencing issues. Again, it's not just, okay, I'm going to abandon the fastball. It's how can we mix it more to get hitters away from just, in MLB The Show, they're guessing fastball.
Yeah.
And when they're getting it, they're crushing it, right?
Yeah.
It's a pretty simple for us to understand, but obviously more goes into it for them. And I think that if he can start to make that tweak where he's able to use the secondary pitches more effectively, because they have been good for him, it's just how can you find that balance with the fastball is his money pitch. That's what makes Carlos Rodon, but also his changeup's great and his slider's great too. Just get the hitters away from the fastball for now.
The Yankees have such resources in this area. Mike Messina had to transform himself. He was a strikeout pitcher early in his career. You remember when the Yankees got him, he was a big-time strikeout guy. CeCe Sabathia, obviously a big strikeout guy when the Yankees picked him up. Even Andy Pettitte, towards the end of his career, had to become more of a mix-and-match guy. There have been a lot of guys that they have transformed over the years where you kind of saw them hit that lull in their career. Remember, CeCe had a couple of years where his ERA was around 5. He couldn't stay healthy. Messina had a bad year. And then after they started mixing their pitches differently, they got better. Jim Cott always says that pitching is about disrupting timing, right? And Carlos Rodon just throwing fastball. That's not disrupting anybody's timing in this day and age. They have those machines. I'm sure you've seen this story. You might have even seen the machines where they can replicate anybody's fastball, anybody's pitches with like a hologram of the pitcher, It has spin rate. It has location. So you can go in there before the game and program, all right, let's throw Carlos Rodon's high fastball, right? Or let's, mix in high fastballs and fastballs down the middle and be ready for the ones down the middle. And now when he's missing with it, you can just look at a chart, right? And see where his heat map is on pitches, see where his misses are, and just gear in for that spot as a hitter, But if he's throwing a fastball 1 out of every 3 times, mixing in the cutter, the changeup, the big roundhouse curveball, which I think is a good pitch that he doesn't use enough, maybe backdoor that for strike one every once in a while, like Andy Pettitte used to. I think that if he starts mixing his pitches, he's still got a live arm, and it'll make that fastball play up. I think as a young pitcher, he's still relatively young. He's 31 years old, but he doesn't have a ton of mileage because he had so many injuries. Yeah. Like it can be tough to see guys start hitting your fastball, and it can ruin your confidence. We saw him, his emotions got the best of him on the bench. But I feel like if he starts having success with those other pitches early in the count, maybe get some strikeouts on the cutter, get some weak contact, has a couple of 8-pitch innings, and he realizes, hey, it's not so hard you don't have to grind and sweat through 3 different Fanatics jerseys a game if you're having some quick innings, right? So I think there's ways out there for Carlos Rodon to make some adjustments. Last thing I want to talk about before we let Max go is the prospects. We talked a little bit about Augustin Ramirez. Obviously the Yankees had a shot to call him up earlier this month when Stanton went down. He was already in AAA, but he had only had about 9 at-bats. He was 1 for 9, recently hit his first home run, but overall has not been great offensively in AAA yet. I think the Yankees like to let guys conquer that level before they give them the call, right? We saw that with Volpe, saw that with Dominguez. They don't need to necessarily leave them there for a long time, but they like them to have a little bit of success there. So he's obviously a possibility at some point. But we got some other guys. We got Rumfeld, we got Yorbit Vivas, we got some pitchers. I mean, who do you see as a young player that could come up and contribute second half that maybe hasn't contributed before?
Sure. I don't know how Rumfield would necessarily fit as much as he has shown some power in AAA. I think that Yorbit Vivas is a great name to throw in this discussion because he's going to be in that consideration to start at second base next year when Gleyber Torres leaves in free agency. If Caleb Durbin was healthy right now, I think he'd be in that discussion as well. I don't know off the top of my head how versatile Vivas is, but I know that Durbin can play all over the place. He's even started playing more outfield this year. But he plays a lot of third base as well. So in theory, he's a great plug-in guy for next year's roster too, with the way that it's probably going to stand. And his offensive makeup, I just wrote a big story on him, so this is fresh. His makeup is great with what the Yankees are trying to do right now too. I mean, he puts the ball in play at a rate that's higher than basically anyone else in baseball. His bat-to-ball skills are innate. And something that's always been there for him, as much as he's only 5'6". He still has a little bit of pop. The defensive versatility makes him really valuable. And again, like we talked about with Rice, he's cheap. He's cost effective. So rather than having to go out and fill a position like that with someone who's making $15 million like Torres, you can just plug someone in who's at the minimum. And I don't know if they'd go with an infield with Rice and Durbin or Vivas on opening day. I mean, that's pretty young, especially with third base too. And Volpe's young as well. But hey, like we talked about at the very top of the show, the infield hasn't been good. You got to start to make changes at some point. The name that I do want to mention though is Jack Neely. And if you don't know too much about him, he's 6'8". He is from Texas, very confident. There you go. Neely in the chat. We're on the same page. He only throws 2 pitches. And when I was in Somerset earlier this year, he's now since been called up to AAA Scranton Wilkes-Barre. I asked him, have you ever thought about adding a third pitch? Right? It seems like everyone's adding 3rd, 4th, 5th pitches. And he was like, no. And I was like, you don't need it? And he's like, well, basically, why would I if my fastball slider mix is this good? And the reason why Neely would be great for them is his strikeout rate. Since the beginning of the 2023 season, in all of affiliated baseball, of all pitchers that have thrown more than 100 innings, Neely has the 2nd best strikeout rate. He's just mowing opponents down, right? And now there is a test here for him in AAA where he's only had a handful of appearances. I think that they wouldn't have considered him with all the turnover in the bullpen when he was still in Somerset. But even Matt Blake said the other day in Toronto that they're having conversations about him. And that's someone that once you bring him up, it's not like a Phil Bickford where you're just going to
Right.
DFA him. You put him on the 40 man, you probably want him to stick at least. You could use his options like they do with Ron Marinaccio, for instance, but his ceiling is high leverage, if not closer. And I don't know how his fastball slider is going to hang against the cream of the crop in the big leagues, right? There's obviously going to be an adjustment there, but he's handled every adjustment in the minors, and he grew up in Texas, but he loves Dellin Betances and Andrew Miller, those imposing figures on the mound that are just going to blow stuff by you, and you know what's coming, and you still can't hit it. That's really the scouting report with him. And again, it's such a perfect fit with what the Yankees have been needing in their bullpen, right? I mean, they need to go out and get veterans at the deadline, but that might be a possible solution for them internally where it's not going to cost them anything to call him up. He's fresh. He's going to want to do well when he comes up, and maybe it's a long-term solution too.
I remember they had this guy Nelson something. I can't remember his name. Was just came up and threw gas a couple of years ago, made a really great impression, and then he just kind of disappeared.
Remember Steve Ridings?
Yeah, Ridings. Stephen Ridings. Nelson.
Okay.
Why am I thinking Nelson? Yeah, Ridings. Stephen Ridings. He was filthy. I mean, he came up 100-mile-an-hour gas on the corners in his first game. And I'm like, where the hell has this guy been? And then we never saw him again. Crazy. I mean, that's pitching. I mean, that's why it's so valuable, because guys break down, right? So, all right. Before I let you go, prediction. Give me one player that you think not on the Yankees right now that after the trade deadline will be.
Oh my goodness. Oh, it's so tough. Can you go first? Give me a second.
I'll take two. I'll say David Robertson and Ryan McMahon will be Yankees.
See, but McMahon, I don't know if the Rockies are going to trade him. And that's
I think they could become. He's 29 years old. They're not going to win this year. I think they could be compelled to move him. I think you could make that case.
Okay.
That's why we pay Brian Cashman the highest salary for any GM, basically. Go out and get this guy. We need him.
Yeah. I like, maybe it's not Ursig, but that type of pitcher, like you said earlier, that second tier. It's not Mason Miller. It's not Tanner Scott, but this is a high leverage guy that has pitched really well. Not going to cost you that much. It's still going to be a sacrifice there to get someone like that who has crazy upside. But him, or I don't think it's Crochet or maybe Kopech. I don't know. It should be easier, but the way that the wild card situation is right now, you just don't know who's going to be traded. And even the guys that are going to be traded, there's going to be so many teams that want them. And I don't know if the Yankees should just unload their farm system, as much as the caveat is, right? I mean, this is their best chance to win since who knows when, 2009, right? I mean, you only have 1 year of Juan Soto. Before you do re-sign him, this is your one shot with him. Cole and Judge are not getting any younger. You got to push all the chips forward. And like we talked about earlier, Cashman's here right now, but who knows if he's going to be years from now. And obviously he feels the pressure. Steinbrenner feels the pressure. If there was ever a time for Hal to say okay to just a huge deadline, it would be now, because of the way last season went too. So as much as the Orioles will probably still be the favorite in the division, unless the Yankees just go crazy at the deadline and everyone stays healthy and everyone starts to produce, there's a lot for them to do. And I think that they can still do really well in the playoffs, but there's a lot of ifs. I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, but there will be trades, and they will get better at the deadline, corresponding with guys coming back from the injured list and all that. But you got to get hot at the right time, right? I mean, they will be a playoff team. It's not like they're going to miss the playoffs, but
right. It's like Derek Jeter always says, it's not the best team that wins, it's the hottest. Look at the D-backs last year. 84 wins, made it to the World Series. We're just looking for that right mix. And having a 60 home run caliber hitter in Judge, and having, Garrett Cole on your staff, these things are not common. It's not going to be this way in 5 years. Judge will be over the hill. Garrett Cole will probably be gone. So, like you said, now is the time. Yanks got to do something. I say be bold, but don't trade Dominguez. That's my position. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. Reminder to subscribe. We're on a mission to 50,000. Go ahead and follow Max Goodman, all his great work, his great writing on NJ.com. And is it at Max T. Goodman? Is that Max T. Goodman on X. And I am Derek, and we will see you when we see you. Appreciate it, Max.
You got it. Thanks.
Boom!